Hi, I'm Glenda Galvez. Today we're going to be making roses and pearl edge bows my way. There are a lot of different ways to make them, but this is something that I've developed that has been easiest for me, and I want to share it with you. If after the end of the video you have any questions or any problems, feel free to contact me either by phone or email. The tools and materials we're going to be using are we have our gum paste, our pinks for the roses, the green for the leaves and the calyx. These are our rose cones, both with the wooden skewer and with the lollipop stick. We have wire, covered wire for the leaves, our green floral tape, white luster dust, and green for the inside of the rose petals. We have a small brush that we'll be using on rose petals. This brush we'll be using on the veiner. We have our palette knife and our ball tool. This will be our calyx cutter, our leaves and the leaf veiner. This is the rose petal cutter that we'll be using today, and this is the rose petal veiner. We are using a rolling pin, and then we have this small cell stick that we'll use to curl the rose petals back to make them have a natural flare. And then it's always good to have a little shortening handy to keep the gum paste from sticking to your fingers. In addition, we have a flap. This is where we keep the cutout petals from drying out. And you'll also need a sponge pad for softening the edges of the petals. I also have a small rolling board, and we'll be using a pasta machine. To make the rose cones, you want to take an equal amount of miniature marshmallows and the cheapest Rice Krispies that you can find. And if you'll break the Rice Krispies up just a little bit, they'll be easier to work with. You don't have to pulverize them. If you do, you'll defeat the purpose of having a light base. What we're going to do is empty in our Rice Krispies and then stir until we've combined it. And once this is thoroughly combined, we're going to take an amount of this, about a spoonful, possibly even, say, a golf ball size. And if you'll put some shortening on your fingers, it won't stick to you quite as bad. Now we're going to use a wooden skewer on this one. When I use the wooden skewers, they're made for the roses that we were going to put directly into the cake. And you want to squeeze this as hard and tight as you can, and then form the cone as you work with it. Make it pointy on the end. I like to make mine about 2 inches from the top to the base, and of course wider at the bottom. We now have a cone. It's better to make these a day or two in advance and let them dry. They'll get quite hard, but they're still lightweight and will support a good size rose or a bud, either one. You can either use the wooden skewer if you want to make a long stem rose. I use a lollipop stick. Here's one that I have made previously that is already dry. And we're going to start with this and roll out the gum paste. Have some styrofoam handy to support your rose. I've done pink. We're going to be working with pink roses. I've made up some paste in different colors. What you want to do is have your darkest color that'll be in the very center of the rose. Make it as dark as you want it. Then take about half of that and mix it with an equal amount of white paste. Then once you've mixed that up, take an equal amount of it and mix with white paste. and what you'll end up with is graduated colors. I use a pasta machine because I like the consistency and the thickness. It also saves old elbows. I'm using a pasta machine with an electric motor, and we're going to start out on setting 1. This is the widest setting. Run it through, crank it down to a little bit larger setting, and now we're going to a 6. You have a nice thin piece of gum paste, and now you want to put this into a flap to keep it from drying out. And now we're ready to cut out our petals. I've emptied some silk white luster dust into a large container just for ease of use. I'm using our brush that's a little wider. You want to put just a bit of the luster dust inside the veiner, the rose petal veiner. This gives the rose just a little bit of a sparkle, a little bit of life. And it doesn't have to be an exact science, and you don't want too much. I don't like to use the pearl dust because it doesn't look natural, but the silk white has a very nice sheen. This is our paste that we ran through the pasta machine, and I'm using a large rose petal cutter. Any size that you like will do, but this is my favorite. We're going to cut out petals and then keep these covered when you're not using them to keep your paste from drying out. Our sponge pad to soften the edges of the petals. Take out a petal, and then you'll want your ball tool. Go around the edge, press hard. That will soften and thin it even further, and then spread it out until you get it to a very thin consistency. Now once you've gone around it and softened it and made it as thin as you can, lift it up and set it inside your veiner, and then press, and this gives it a natural veining look, and you can see the sheen from the luster dust on the petal. Lay it aside to dry. I usually just lay it on the edge of my pad. You don't have to redust your veiner every time, but probably every second time. You don't want a very heavy coating on there, just light. And then we're going As you can see, I press pretty hard. The gum paste I use is a simple mixture of Bakel's rolled fondant, and I add about 2 teaspoonfuls of Tylose powder for each pound. Knead it in thoroughly and let it rest overnight before I use it. You can use your favorite gum paste recipe. This just happens to be my favorite. There. You want to make about 4 to 5 of the darker color, then come back with your medium color, make 5 petals out of this color, and then 5 to 7 of the lightest shade. And in a minute we'll show you how to put them together. Whether or not your petals dry fast will depend a great deal on the humidity. I live in north central Texas, and sometimes our humidity is as dry as the Sahara Desert, and other times it feels like a rainforest. You have to adjust your recipe accordingly. If it's a very dry day, I don't need quite as much Tylose in my gum paste. If it is a very wet day, you need more Tylose, and you might even have to resort to cornstarch, which is a last resort because it dries it out so much that your petals will crack around the edges, which is not to be desired. Now, if you can see, I've got my darker shades here. This is going to be inside the bud. And here are my second color, the lighter shade. This I work fairly fast, so I like to have my petals out drying as I'm working. If you're a beginner, you may not want to have quite as many drying. Maybe take it down to 2 at a time. I like to have them a little bit dry because I can curve them more naturally, and I'll demonstrate that in just a moment. And turn these petals over as you go, because one side, of course, is always the side that's down against the flap is going to be wetter than the top side. And so if you'll notice, what I'm doing is thinning out the top side, then veining, and as I take it out of the veiner, I'm turning it over so this side will dry a little more. Now we'll go with the very lightest shade, and you can put anywhere from 5 to 10 more petals on the outside. The more petals, of course, the larger the rose. Sometimes it just tells you when it's finished. I've heard my roses referred to as giant roses. Personally, I consider them life-size. I don't do anything in miniature. This is what we're going to do to put them together. Our very first stage is the cone with one petal wrapped around it. From there, we'll go on the opposite side and put another petal around it to cover the cone. Now these look lumpy and bumpy, but don't worry about it, they'll all be hidden by the time you get all your petals together. The next stage is where we start interlapping the petals, and when we get those done, it will look like this. So now we'll start putting the petals on. If you want to stop at that point, you can have a rosebud. Or if you like lots of petals, then you end up with a nice full-size rose. Let's begin with the skewer. We've already got one petal on here, so we'll start adding. I like Tylose gum glue, and the way you'll make this is to use about a half a teaspoonful of Tylose in about an ounce of water. I like mine thick, almost a gel. I like this better than gum arabic because it doesn't sour and smell bad, and it does a really good job. I like it thick so it doesn't wet the petal too much. You're going to put gum glue all over the inside of this petal. Take our cone. I've already applied the first petal. So now we're going to take this side, the rough side, and lay it right inside this petal, about even with the top, and then wrap it tightly around. Tuck it around the base and just fold it in as neatly as you can. Don't worry if it's a little bit rough. Again, you're going to have other petals that will cover this up in a little while. As you work, just put it inside a piece of styrofoam to hold it securely, and then go to your next petal. We have 2 on here. These next 3 will be handled a little differently, and since I do a lot of these, I like to work fast and get them out of the way. So just move these petals up, turn these over, the next 3 petals, turn them over, and take your gum glue and paint the gum glue on about the outside third of each petal. Okay. Next, take your cone, hold the petal in your fingers, and then turn this cone so that where this is together, turn it to the outside to my right is where it's going to be. And then just lay it down inside, pull that over, and leave this side unattached. Pick your next petal up and put it just inside. Tap it down slightly. Put a little gum glue on the inside of this petal. Bring it over, attach it, then turn. And where this petal is open, you're going to put this just inside. Tap it down. Apply your gum glue. Wrap it around. Keep turning. Apply your gum glue and wrap until you have a fairly tight look. Turn it upside down and then just tap and press this excess paste onto the base. Again, this is going to look rough. Don't worry about it. It will be covered in a little bit. And this is what we have now. This could be a bud or just the center of a great big rose. Now we're going to set this aside and go for the next stage. The next petal, we're into the lighter shade now. This is the medium color. And you want to put gum glue about 2/3 of the way up. Start at the very bottom and go about 2/3 of the way up. You take your bud, and where these petals overlap, you want to lay that, center it right there, and stick that and then tuck it around neatly. Again, tap your bottom down. Set it aside, pick up your next petal. Do the same. Now we don't have to interlap these. I've tried it both ways and they look the same when you get through, and this is the easier method. Next, go to where this petal has joined. You see this opening where these two petals are? That will tell you where the next petal goes. You're going to lay that down inside there and wrap that around, tuck in the bottom. And now don't get in too big a hurry to start curling the petals back. You have a much more natural look if you have some of the petals that are not quite curled back yet. Set that aside, start with the next one. On this one, I'm going to only put it on about half because I want the petals to start to curl out now. Again, you can tell where this should go because of the looks of these petals where they join. So just center that right in the edge and snug it up against there. Now, see, isn't that nice? Okay, now for the rest of these petals, we're going to start curving them out. To do that, we're going to use this little cell stick. You could use a toothpick. This is just something that I found has come in handy. Now, curl these petals back. Just give it kind of a natural curve. I'm pressing with my finger against the cell stick so that it will hold the shape that I'm giving it. Now cup it with your thumb to give it a little shape. Now we're going to only glue on the outside edges and just a little at the bottom. Again, we're going to pick up our rose, and you can see where it needs to go. There's our little, I guess you call it a little triangle. Lay that inside and tuck it down. And shape it with your thumb. And again, just glue onto the outside edge and just a little bit up. And then attach it. And you're only pressing on the edges where you've glued. You're going to leave the top alone and let it curve back just slightly. These are beginning to dry, and I can shape them a little bit better than when they're wet. But you can't be too slow, or else they'll crack on you. Okay, see where it needs to go? You could quit right now and have a partially open rose, but we're going to add another petal or two and make it a fuller rose. There are no rules on how to curve these petals. It's just whatever feels right to you. Okay, again, you could stop here, or you could just keep putting petals on until you got to the point of this size rose. It's just a matter of taste on what you prefer. We're going to now make a calyx for our rose. I've taken a small amount of green gum paste. We're going to roll this out, not paper thin, but reasonably so. Okay, if you were doing this on a pasta machine, this would probably be a 4.5 to a 5. Then we're going to take a calyx cutter, press down and try to get your edges as smooth as you can. Lift up your excess paste. And I'm going to lift this and put it on my sponge pad. Take your small end of your ball tool and go around the edges to soften them and thin them just a bit. Make a little indentation. Scissors. We're going to use the scissors and cut into, we're going to call this the head and the legs. We're going to cut the legs, and the head. And we're going to leave the arms alone. But we're going to go in and pinch each end. Okay. Now you want to lift this. We're going to put some gum glue on the center and a little bit of the way up each one of these little sections. It's a little easier if you'll make a hole in it before you put your flower through. Okay, now I'm going to take our rose and slide it through that hole. Hold it with your fingers and ease it up. And then with your thumb, just kind of attach it. And then curl these into a natural position. And then you'll need a small amount of paste for a rose hip. Your rose down through and up and attach it. Now, while this is still wet is the best time to tape it, because that way you're not as likely to break off those little points on your sepal or calyx. Stretch your floral tape and start wrapping right at the base. This is I think it's a moss green, Nile green or moss green tape. If you have a little bit of a rough area between where the tape is and the rose hip, just take your fingers and smooth it around. And again, shape your calyx till it looks natural. And that completes. We have a partially open rose, and now we're all complete. Next, we're going to make leaves. I've taken a portion of our green gum paste. A rose has 3 sizes of leaves. You've got a large leaf with 2 smaller sizes on either side. And we're going to turn our board over. This is a cell board that has the grooves in it already, which saves you a lot of time. Place your paste right in the middle of these 3 grooves and roll. And trim this off the edge, it'll be a lot neater. And then turn this over. Turn your board over to the smooth side. And then position your leaf over the ridge and cut it smoothly. Now I have 3 wires. These are 28 gauge. You want to moisten the ends with your gum glue. Wipe off the excess. You don't want it too wet. And then carefully guide it into the ridge on the leaf. About a third of the way in. Tighten it down a little bit, and then take your leaf vaner, lay it in, and press, and then remove this, and then lay this on something to give it some shape. You can either use crumpled tinfoil or one of these sponge pieces, and give it a little bit of movement so it'll have a little life. Now let's make the other 2 sizes. Again, moisten the edge or the end of your wire and guide it in. Place it in the Again, we're going to lay this on the sponge pad. I'm going to vein this. Okay, now we're going to set these aside to dry. They're better if you can dry them overnight, which we magically have done. And we've wired these together, the larger leaf at the top and then the 2 side leaves, but they look lifeless. We're going to give this a little bit of life by adding some extra color to it. And the way I like to do it is to put a little bit of shortening on my finger, and on the dried leaf, smooth a bit of shortening over it. It'll also give it a nice sheen. Not a tremendous amount, just a very thin coating, just whatever you've got on the end of your finger. And I'm using a cocoa dusting powder, and what I want to do is to go around the edge with a little bit of this dusting powder, and then a little in the center, and then brush out just a bit like you're cleaning off your brush. And again, we're going to go around the edge of each leaf. Just gives it a little bit of depth. Mostly you want to confine this to the bottom of the leaf. Don't get too much on the ends, except around the edge. There, that gives it a little bit more life. Compare and see what you think. This is with nothing, and then this was with a little color added. I like the little color. Now then, to attach it to our rose, we've got some floral tape, and just position it wherever you think it's pretty. Wrap around and then go back through where it joins. We want to hide that join. Pull that through. We're going to wrap around some more. And to keep from having such a heavy, thick ridge, you can use wire cutters and cut off some of the extra wire. And now we have the leaf attached to the rose.